You see this? This is a statue. This is statue. This is a graven image. A graven image standing next to a church. The Christians made this graven image. And of course, you know that this is nothing new. A graven image like this is nothing new at all. But this is something that our Heavenly Father warns us not to do. God warned us not to make a graven image. We are not to make a graven image of anything, in the likeness of anything, not in the likeness of any man, in the likeness of any woman or bird or fish. We're told not to make a graven image in the likeness of anything. But you see graven images standing in Christian churches. The Christians are the ones making graven image and putting in their own churches. But the Bible clearly condemns that. When God clearly condemns it, Christianity is paganism. Christianity is paganism. It's time for you to wake up and come out of Christianity. You need to begin to keep God's law, because Christianity teaches against God's law when the Bible clearly tells us, even Christ himself tells us that we have to keep God's law. If you don't keep God's law, you will not be allowed into the kingdom of heaven. Christ himself said that those who will be allowed to come into the kingdom of heaven are those that kept God's law. In Revelation chapter 22 verse 14, Christ said that those who will be allowed to come into the kingdom of heaven are those that kept God's law. In Matthew chapter 5 verse 17, Matthew chapter 5 verse 17 to verse 19, Christ himself said that that we should not think that he came to abolish the law or the writings of the prophet. He did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. He said that until heaven and earth passes away, that all the laws and the commandments are still in effect. All of God's law are still in effect according to Christ. As long as you can see the heavens and the earth, all the laws are still in effect. Christianity is teaching lies, telling you that you're saved by grace only, that you don't have to keep God's law, that the laws are done away with. They're teaching that the laws are done away with. How can that be so when Christ told you that all the laws will still be in effect as long as there is heaven and there is earth? As long as you can see the heavens, you can look up and see the sky, and you can stand on the ground, all the laws are still in effect. Somebody has to be lying here. It's either the Christian church are lying or Christ was lying. Who is telling the truth? The Bible clearly says that we have to keep God's law. The Bible made it clear that we have to keep God's law. In First John chapter 2, First John chapter 2 verse 3, First John chapter 2 from verse 3 to verse 6, it says that by this we know that we know him, if we keep his commandment. Anyone that claims to know him but doesn't keep his commandment is a liar. First John chapter 2 from verse 3 to verse 6 says that the only way we are going to know that we know God is by keeping God's commandment. Anyone that claims to know God but doesn't keep God's commandment is a liar. Now, let me ask you, are you keeping God's commandment? Are you keeping his laws and his commandments? Because what people are doing today is to pick and choose. We cannot pick and choose. Christ told us that all the laws are still in effect. All of it. We can't just pick and choose. All the laws. You need to begin to look into the book of Leviticus, the book of Numbers, the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Exodus, and you need to begin to keep those laws. Most importantly, you need to start keeping God's Sabbath. The Sabbath day is one of the, if not the most important law in the Bible, because God said in Exodus, our Heavenly Father said in Exodus chapter 31, Exodus 31, verse 12 to verse 18. Exodus chapter 31, verse 12 to 18. Our Heavenly Father said that his Sabbath day is a sign that identifies those that belongs to him. God's Sabbath days is a sign that identifies those that belongs to him. You need to begin to keep God's Sabbath day. And his Sabbath day is not on Sunday. The Sabbath day is not on Sunday, and the Sabbath day is not on Saturday. See, this is the lie that Satan have pushed into the world through Christianity. Saturday is not the Sabbath day, and Sunday is not the Sabbath day. What is the Sabbath day? Our Heavenly Father told us to work for 6 days and rest on the 7th day. Work for 6 days, rest on the 7th day. On the 7th day, you don't go to work. On the 7th day, you stay home and rest. And that 7th day is not on Saturday. That 7th day is not on Sunday. That 7th day is regulated by the moon. Because according to Genesis chapter 1 verse 14, according to Genesis chapter 1 verse 14 to verse 16, and also Psalm 119, Psalm 104, Psalm 104 verse 19, Psalm 104 verse 19. If you read these places, you will see that God made the moon, the sun and the moon. God made it for us to use it as our calendar. If you read 1 Samuel chapter 20, you will see that the Israelite was using the moon as their calendar. 1 Samuel chapter 20. Also in Colossians chapter 2, Colossians chapter 2 verse 16. If you read Colossians chapter 2 verse 16, you will see that Paul was telling the early followers of Christ to not let anybody condemn them or judge them for observing the Sabbath day, for observing the new moon day, for observing the feast days. We have to observe the feast days. We have to observe the new moon day. The new moon day is the first day of the month, the first day of the lunar month. The calendar that the world is using right now is a man-made calendar. That was not the calendar that Christ used. You need to begin to keep God's law. This is very, very important. Your salvation depends on this, because God made it very clear that he will soon destroy those that refuse to keep his law. Those that refuse to keep God's law are going to go through the wrath, through the judgment and punishment that will come from the Most High, that will happen very soon. Just like as it was in the days of Noah. Christ said in Matthew 24 that before he comes back, it will be as it was in the days of Noah. You need to begin to keep God's law. This is very, very important. In Isaiah chapter 24, Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1 to verse 6. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1 to verse 6. And also Malachi chapter 4, verse 1 to verse 6. Isaiah 24, 1 to 6. Malachi chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. Made it very clear that very soon, if you read those places, you will see that very soon, all those that refuse to keep God's law are going to be destroyed. Very soon, World War III will break out. That World War III are going to be punishment from God. And those that refuse to keep his laws will not be delivered and be kept out of that punishment. They will be in this world and they will go through that punishment that will come from God. And the reason for this punishment is because people refuse to keep his laws and his commandments. You need to begin to keep God's law. You need to begin to keep God's law. This is very important. Christ and all his followers and all the apostles and the disciples, they all kept God's law. And we're told that we have to keep God's law. Paul tells you in Romans chapter 2, verse 13. Romans 2:13. Paul said that not the hearers of the law are just. Not the hearers of the law are just, but the doers of the law will be justified. That's what Paul said in Romans 2:13. Not the hearers of the law are just, but the doers of the law. Can you remember that during the time that Paul was writing this, there was no New Testament. Paul was referring to God's law. The same laws you see in the book of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Exodus. That's the law that he was referring to. In James chapter 1, verse 22 to 25. James 1, 22 to 25. It says, be ye doer of the law, and not just hearer of the law, but be doers of the law. Because if you're only a hearer of the law, you're deceiving yourself. This is very important. Paul says in Romans chapter 6, Romans chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. Are we going to continue breaking God's law, that his grace may abound? He said, God forbid. We cannot continue breaking God's law. This is very important. Your salvation depends on this. Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 12, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Why did he say that? Because the wrath of God is coming. God's judgment is coming upon all those that refuse to keep his laws. You need to begin to keep God's law. This is very important. Come out of Christianity. Come out of Christianity. Stuff like this behind me, things like this are proof that Christianity is paganism. It's proof that Christianity is paganism. Christianity does not teach God's law. Christ told us that we have to keep God's law. Revelation chapter 22 verse 14. Christ made it very clear that those that kept God's law are those who will be allowed into the kingdom of heaven. Those that kept God's law are the ones who will be allowed to eat from the tree of life and will be allowed into the kingdom of heaven. This is very important. Wake up, come out of Christianity. You need to begin to keep God's law. If you are a man, you need to grow your beard. If you're a woman, you need to begin to cover your head, dress moderately, stop eating pork, and put on your tassel. Do you know about a tassel? Do you know about something called tassels? Christ wore tassels, according to Matthew chapter 14, verse 34 to 36. Matthew 14, 34 to 36. Christ was wearing tassel. Also in Luke chapter 8, verse 42 to verse 46. Luke chapter 8, verse 42 to 46, you will see that Christ was wearing tassel. The apostles and the disciples, they were all wearing tassels. But today, most Christians have no idea what a tassel is. Why were they wearing tassel? Because God commanded us in Numbers chapter 15. Numbers chapter 15, verse 37 to verse 41. Numbers 15, 37 to 41. Our Heavenly Father told us to make tassels and put in the four corners of our garment. You have to wear your tassel. It's very important. You have to keep God's law. This is a warning to you. If you don't keep God's law, you will be destroyed. Christianity is paganism. You need to begin to keep God's law. This is very, very important. Come out of that Christianity. Stop giving them your money. Stop paying tithe. Tithe has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with money. They're ripping you off. Come out of Christianity. You need to begin to keep God's law. You need to begin to keep the Sabbath. You need to read the book of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Exodus. Every law you see there, you need to put it into practice. Like Christ warned us in Revelation chapter 22, verse 14. Those who will be allowed into the kingdom of heaven are those that kept God's law. God's judgment is coming very soon, according to Isaiah chapter 24, verse 1 to 6. Isaiah 24, verse 1 to 6, and Malachi chapter 4, verse 1 to 6. Very soon, God will soon punish those that refuse to keep his laws. God's judgment is coming, and this is a warning to you. This is a warning to you. If you don't begin to keep God's law, very soon you will be destroyed. God is going to destroy those in this world that refuse to keep God's law. Christianity is paganism. It's time to wake up and begin to keep God's law and commandment. If you have any question about all this, if you have any question, feel free to contact me. Feel free to look for my contact information under this video or on my channel and contact me. This is a wake-up call. This is a warning. I know that you will most likely not heed this warning. I know that you will most likely not heed this warning because you love pleasure, you love to live lawless lifestyle. I understand, but this is a warning to you. This is a warning. You have been warned. On the judgment day, you will say that you will not say that you were not warned. You need to begin to keep God's law and commandment. This is a warning to you. Come out of Christianity because Christianity is paganism.